Oh my god. Oh my god, the old gods, man. The old fucking gods. They held us for years. Wait, was it years?
It was more like a year, like 9 months.
It was like about a year.
Man, we were the babies of old gods, man. Shit.
I don't know about babies. Babies, that's making it a little weird. I don't know.
Best April Fool's joke ever. Record an episode about World of Warcraft and then disappear for a year.
Yeah, no, it's great. We've done great things. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Heathen Bitches podcast. We have left the stomach of N'Zoth. I don't know if N'Zoth has a stomach, but it does now. And
I think you fight in it.
You fight in N'Zoth's stomach?
Sure.
Okay, let's not get sidetracked before we finish the introduction. Hi. If you don't know me, I'm one of your hosts. I'm Glade. You can find me on YouTube at the Everglades Ergi. We're also having a wonderful time with our other two hosts who are here every time because they're hosts. We got Sigrun.
You could find me on my blog, placeofmadsigrun.com, placeofmadsigrun.wordpress.com, whatever, as well as my account on Blue Sky, which would be Empress-Trixana at bluesky.social.
Yeah, and then we got the one, the only, the fishy lawn gnome.
Agiel.
Oh. No.
Shout out to Agiel.
This is Fishy. Shout out to Agiel, though. Agiel, yo, what's up? I hope you're doing good. Fishy, where can they find you?
I don't have socials. I'm on Discord. Join the hold.
You can't find him. He's an enigma.
Say hi to me there.
Today we're talking. So we've been gone for a while, but we thought that we'd come back with a real banger of an episode, something that is really important to all of us. And we actually recorded it once before, and we're just like, we're not happy with this.
The audio was terrible.
Let's redo it. Make sure we get it done right this time. And this is this time. We're getting it done right.
And then another 6 months passed.
Yeah. A lot of months, actually. Like a whole month of months. Anyway, the topic we're going to be covering today is polytheist theology. And it's going to be a little part 1 of it. There may be a part 2 later down the road. Who fucking knows? Right?
We probably will talk about more over time. There's a lot of things that can be covered that are, in my opinion, pretty necessary to actually grasp a proper sort of view on what polytheism and theology, how that works actually theologically as compared to, the other religions of the world like Christianity and whatnot.
Yeah. We, as polytheists, have a very different belief system than most theists in the world. Which also means that the way that we look at the world, the philosophy of our religion is going to be kind of a little bit different. So I think the best place for it to start really is if we start talking about epistemology, how we know things and why we know them, What is knowledge?
Your mother.
Got him.
Okay. And it's a good question when we're talking about religion, a place where knowledge is hard sought and often not found. There's an expression by me and only me that if you're looking for any certainty in religion, that's a fool's errand. So having a discussion about knowledge seems like a bit of an odd take, doesn't it? So epistemology, we're going to talk about a little something called phenomenal conservatism, right? So this is a somewhat controversial opinion or position. But essentially, the premise of it is very simple. If something looks to you as if it is X, right? So if you look at the sky, we'll use the sky as an example here. If you look at the sky and it appears to be blue, and you have no reason to assume or to have been convinced that it isn't blue, then it is entirely reasonable for you to say, I have a justified belief that the sky is blue because it seems blue and there's nothing putting forth to me that it isn't, right? So the idea that what things seem to be and their appearances is enough justification for a belief outside of the presence of negative qualifiers or of positive ground for disbelief, right? How does this apply to religion? Well, a lot of religious experience is something that cannot be proved. It is also something that cannot be disproved. And so if you are a polytheist, you might say that, I have religious experience that seems to me to be of completely different sorts, almost as if it is from two different deities because of the difference in quality of the experience. And I have no reason to think that it can't be two different deities or that it isn't two different deities reaching out to me. And so I might qualify these experiences based on the appearance that they are, in fact, from two different deities. Phenomenal conservatism is that. The reason it's kind of controversial is that people will say that it is too liberal of an approach. From a phenomenal conservative viewpoint, one could say that I have a justified belief in something that is false. And I don't understand why that's controversial to people, because having a belief be justified and having a belief be true are two different things. We do this all the time.
No way.
Yeah, Yahweh. Shit. But yeah, no, it is. It's something we do all the time. You ever seen that? What's it called? The test. They it's a YouTube video. They got the gorilla, and it walks past a bunch of people passing a ball, and you're told count the number of times the ball passes between people with X color shirt to a different color shirt, and then they're like, oh wow, there's a gorilla in there. You didn't even see the gorilla because of your selective attention. So you were justified in thinking that there wasn't a gorilla because you didn't see the gorilla. You didn't notice it, right? That's a false belief, but you have no reason to believe that there's a gorilla there otherwise. The other big critique of phenomenal conservatism is one that is...
Solipsism.
No.
Oh, damn it.
You can't just say solipsism every fucking time.
Oh my gosh. The other big critique of phenomenal conservatism is a part of an argument for phenomenal conservatism that we didn't talk about yet. In that phenomenal conservatism, if you were to not participate in it, it would be self-defeating. The arguments against phenomenal conservatism are largely self-defeating. So what I mean by this is if you're applying phenomenal conservatism, if something appears to be true and you have no reason not to believe it, then you're going to believe that this is true. Or if it appears to be false and you have no reason to believe it's true, then you're going to believe that it's false. If you're not participating in phenomenal conservatism, then essentially what you're saying is this thing seems to be true, and I have no reason to believe it to be false. Therefore, I'm going to believe that it is false anyhow. Or this thing seems to be fake as fuck. Take, I don't know, one of those roadside circus attractions from the mid-1900s where they just stitched fish legs, or fish's absence of legs, onto monkeys and called it a mermaid, right? You're looking at this thing and it looks fake and you have plenty of reason to believe that it's fake, or no reason to believe that it's true even. And you're going to say, yeah, I believe this. I believe this anyway. I mean, that would be ridiculous. I think we can agree that would be ridiculous.
But have you considered that mermaid is actually proof that ancient astronauts had visited us?
I have not considered that. My response is solipsism.
I will continue. I will continue to not consider that.
But in essence, the point that I'm trying to get at here is, while it's not perfect, there are other legitimate critiques of phenomenal conservatism. It's not perfect. It is somewhat a foundation of most religious theology, in that because of the distance between us and the divine, we don't really have another way to approach things apart from their seemings. Or not much more ways.
So there you go. That's phenomenal conservatism. That is that I would say probably one of the more foundational bits of philosophy that you should definitely take away from this episode. Anyway, so now that we have learned about phenomenal conservatism and how that's very valuable as part of justification for our beliefs, let's talk about where those beliefs kind of come from. For example, we should understand religion first and foremost as a bit of institutions and as traditions. When we talk about institutes, you have the historical big things, you have the Roman Catholic Church with catechism and
on the more pagan side of things, you've got the city of Athens, right? Or the Temple of Uppsala, these places where belief or knowledge is passed down from a centralized source. You're going to find this with organized religion. It's kind of the thing that makes organized religion a thing.
Yeah, and then in both like most other like ancient cases, as well as especially nowadays in modern paganism, you tend to have it more as decentralized traditions, decentralized institutions of thought, where you don't really have like a concrete organization or two. And even if there is technically an organization, it is so small as it doesn't like directly affect things, but it still affects you.
And they've usually historically been bad.
Yeah.
As far as paganism goes, I will agree that historically decentralized institutions have not been the kindest to us. You've got like Gerald Gardner, Garmin Lord, Aleister Crowley, Diana Paxson. You could probably lump. I almost said Vince McMahon, but that's not who I mean. I mean Stephen McMahon as someone who would be considered someone whose thoughts have become institutionalized in a lot of the ways that pagans think. And it's worth bringing up that you could be the most eclectic witch out there, right? You might be. I'm not gonna qualify that. You might just be the most eclectic witch out there, right? You might see yourself as the most independent practitioner, but because of the way that ideas disperse through people and through populations, it's very, very likely that you have been influenced by these institutions of thought, as we're calling them. You have been influenced by these institutions in ways that you may not even be aware of. You might not know that that is where your friend who you borrowed some part of their tradition because you were like, I like that, I want that in my praxis. You don't know where they got that from, or where their friend that they got it from, right? Or even just through, cultural osmosis. You look at how people get into the religion. They might watch I hate that this is a thing, but I'm sure that there are people out there who watch The Good Witch on Netflix and are like, that's religion. That's what I want, right?
Even in heathenry, there's like still a tremendous amount of influence left over from theodism, even though theodism has largely fallen out of popular, thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just the inner yard, outer yard bullshit.
Inner yard, outer yard shit, or like just the preponderance of tribes and clans and all that nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
The roles within kindreds are a lot of times are really theidish. Any newcomer is going to see inner yard, outer yard bullshit before anything else.
Mythic literalism.
Shit, that is an excellent transition point.
If you want to talk about the most decentralized institution in paganism, mythic literalism, the place where, no one really started mythic literalism, it just grew.
The place where theology goes to die.
Yeah, that's where we could definitely get onto our jumping point towards the potatoes of the meat and potatoes of today's episode. Essentially, theology. What the fuck is theology? It's obviously like religious understanding. The philosophy of religion, the philosophy of knowing what gods are.
Etymologically, the word theology comes from the Greek word theoi, which means God, and the other Greek word suffix, rather, ology, which means the study of. I don't know if that's true.
I thought you were going to say the other Greek word succubus.
Yeah, succubus.
Greek succubus part 2. Anyway, so yeah, that is theology. That is what theology technically is. And as polytheists, there tends to be not much really going on. Like, there's been attempts over the years of people doing, attempts at, polytheistic theology.
Like
been
Greer
and, the fuck is it? Dylan.
Who's the other? Yeah, Dylan. But yeah, it's theology has largely been the realm of monotheism as far as innovation goes for the last 1,000 years. Although that's largely to do with paganism not really
Aquinas again.
being a thing for the last... I mean, Aquinas, but also, the decline of polytheism. That's not to say that we're without hope, because we do have ancient philosophers to look at their theology and their understandings of theology to start to create our own conception of this practice that is polytheist theology.
Correct.
The Romans.
The Romans, the Greeks. The Romans and Greeks.
Pretty much just the Romans and Greeks.
That's about it.
So, with the...
You're looking for Norse theological writers. I think you might be SOL.
Yeah,
It's a little
I
bit.
mean, if you look east, there's going to be more stuff. But as far as
East and South, yeah.
as far as paganism goes, it's just the Romans and the Greeks. The Celts and the Picts weren't. I mean, we don't have anything from the Picts, but the Celts don't. They didn't really write down a lot of theory.
Unfortunately not. But, well, thankfully, yeah, Rome and Greece wrote a lot. And so today we are going to start with one of those Roman writers. This writer was a bit of a polymath. He wrote about a whole lot of shit. He wrote about agricultural seasons. He wrote about function of state. He wrote about chronology. Most of his work has been lost, unfortunately, including the work that we're kind of relying on today. Big shout out to Marcus Terentius Varro, writer of everything, including the antiquity of religious things, basically. The antiquity of things pertaining to the gods. This text is a little interesting. When you actually dig into Varro's reasoning for writing it, there seems to be a bit of controversy about what purpose he actually had in writing it, whether he's a religious reformer, if he was being a little bit of a troll with some of it. Certainly some parts might seem contradictory in at the actual body of the text, but we're not going to look at the body of the whole text. We're going to look at a specific section that was very key in the formation of something else. And this is going to be a theme when it comes to polytheist philosophy going forward. When it comes to polytheist theology, the works of Varro pertaining to religious matters are largely preserved in the works of one Saint Augustine.
Bum, bum, bum. Oh no, the Catholics, not again. Why does it always the Catholics?
We always end up with the Catholics. So, yeah, St. Augustine wrote a work that we call the City of God, in which he is basically providing a sort of foundation for Christian theology going forward. This is very key text for the Roman Catholic Church. In it, he pretty much wholesale quotes, kind of plagiarizes a bit Varro's work, kind of shits on it in a couple places, but heavily relies on it in others. And in particular, he relies on a sort of tripartite division of theology. When I first saw this tripartite division of theology, I was like, okay, this explains a lot. This is perfect. This is a perfect sort of basis for a lot of things. Modifying it a little bit for myself, you'll see a little bit of this later, I think it serves as a perfect foundation. So let's get into it. His tripartite division of theology is mythic theology, philosophical theology, and the theology of the state. Political theology, civic theology, all that. We're going to start today with mythic theology first. Essentially, the theology as described by poets, mythographers, the like, theology as based on the epic tales of gods and shit.
And our first take on mythic theology is that it's really not that useful. It has its uses, but largely pagans apply it in too general a term.
Yes, this is going to bring us back to when we mentioned mythic literalism, both in this episode and in previous times, where you look at the myths and you just kind of interpret this is exactly as believed. This is how you end up getting such things as Odin is a a complete bastard because he's doing all these things, when that's probably not how the religion actually saw it for that much.
Or you get my archaeology professor saying that the Greeks literally believed that Zeus cummed rain onto the city of Athens.
Maybe more controversially, the belief on whether or not gods can die
Oh,
is
yeah.
really
That's a good
mostly
one.
heavily based in mythic literalism.
Yeah, that's definitely a big thing, especially in heathen circles, because, you have the famous story of Ragnarok,
And
where the gods die.
it's based on our least reliable myth.
Very conflicting myth. Some elements might be genuine, some elements very clearly not, at least to our eyes.
Even if you were to take it as completely reliable, going from Ragnarok to saying that, this is what they theologically believed about the gods, that they believed they could die, is still missing the forest for the trees for why myth was written down in the first place.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Mythic literalism is actually bad. Why? Because we know who wrote the myths. We see people have competitions about writing myths and have critique of writing myth because it's not divinely inspired. It was part of entertainment, as it was as much literature as it was religion. You should look at myths like Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer. It's alt historical fiction. There are some true things in there. There are some historical things that actually happened, but a lot of the set dressing around it is indicative of how people think about Abraham Lincoln, how people think about the gods, how they thought about him, how they felt about him, but not necessarily what actually happened, right? But there are some things that myths are good for. Myths are good for looking at how people before us practice, how the intricacies of their own praxis, which is hardly recorded in Norse myth, but if you look at Greek or other places, that's something where you're going to have value there. It shows us how our ancestors viewed the gods, at least in part, when looking past Christian influence and shit like that. And it also lets us know the ways in which our ancestors differed or didn't differ in different regions, Noting these differences also helps break down the idea of mythic literalism. Okay, that's mythic theology. Thank you.
I will only add one more thing, and that even though Varro shits on it in his text, because he does shit on it, he calls belief in myth things as superstitious, which I don't disagree. He still clearly sees it as invaluable and puts it as one of the big three. So, like Glade said, it is still valuable.
Bro's conflicted.
Anyway.
We're all conflicted.
Anyway, what is not conflicted upon by Varro or by us is going to be the next section, which is natural theology, or philosophical theology, however you want to call it. The theology of logic, reasoning, and thinking, essentially. This is where you tend to see, like, the Greek philosophers, like fucking Plato, or some less insane ones, like
Epicurus.
Epicurus.
Socrates.
Epicurus is good.
Socrates was insane, but that's besides the point.
It was good. It's better. It's a better insanity.
Diogenes.
Diogenes is just based anyway.
Yeah, so we're looking at the land of logic and reason. This is where you might actually have something to debate, right? We're looking at making sure that what we're saying makes logical sense. If you believe in... It's one of the main arguments against Christian theology, in that there are parts of Christianity that are completely incoherent internally, right? Or inconsistent with the world. And there's parts of pagan practices, too, that have become mainstream that are incoherent or inconsistent. But if you look at shit like the Trinity, it becomes very clear, and it's a useful example.
Exactly. And because this is talking about philosophy, and which is knowledge, the love of learning, there are certain parts of it, like, you could have fallacious arguments for divine things.
Yeah, like, you gotta be careful for fallacies, right? Saying, this person gave me a theological argument that I disagree with because I don't like the person it came from. That's the genetic fallacy. Within the realm of natural theology, what we're trying to do here is make sure that what we're saying and what we see, or what we believe and what we see, kind of line up. And so part of that does unfortunately mean that things like science denialism isn't going to be theologically sound, right? Because it relies on looking at a world that is fundamentally different from how we've seen it be consistent, right? Greer puts forth the idea of strong versus weak miracles, right? Strong miracles being the parting of the Red Sea, and a weak miracle being something that could actually happen, like a rain, right?
Yeah.
And so that's one of those kind of examinations that would fall under natural theology, looking at things like, hey, this whole category of things that we think the gods do or have done in the past does not really align with what we've seen as physically possible in the universe. We're adjusting the belief towards what we can demonstrate and towards what makes logical sense rather than what was fucking written down in myth.
Yeah.
It also gets muddy when you start checking it with UPG, you know?
It
Because UPG is so prevalent in pagan circles.
Oh, God, it really is.
It's not a bad thing, necessarily. It's just another thing you have to weigh.
right.
Yep.
And it's part of the reason why you'll often see people say UPG is inherently a personal experience, and so that knowledge does not apply to other people because they didn't have that experience. Natural theology, when using like phenomenal conservatism, your UPG is valid because it seems like that's what happened to you. You have no reason to believe it's not what happened to you. Great. But then trying to apply that to other people, well, you're going to have an issue because that experience isn't evidence for anyone else.
It's not transferable.
Yeah. Natural theology should align us more than it divides us. But when you look in like in nitty-gritty individual shit, that's not always going to be the case.
Now that we've brought up, matters of UPG and whatnot, that's actually a fairly good segue to get into the last form of theology that Varro brings up. He brings up, civic theology, the theology of the state, which, well, we're not states.
What do you mean we're
I
not
hope-
states? My name is Garmin Lord. I have founded the Alderatia. This is our state.
Oh no.
State theology of theodism.
I mean, that's arguably a modern example of state theology.
True.
Of trying to invent state theology, or if you want an actual example, you could probably look at like the religious functions of the United States and whatnot, but we're not talking about that. Instead, because most polytheist groups in the modern day West are, they're small, they're a little scattered around, they don't really have like cities of pagans all over the place. Instead, what you have is a theology of praxis, which is praxis. Like, there's not really genuinely much that you can say about it. It's how you do things. It's like it's what stuff you give to what god, what things you do, how are your rituals, like it's how you function in your relationship with the gods.
It is the performance of religion.
Exactly. It is. And this is where you really don't have to say too much, because like if you're not sure about praxis things, there's a lot of really good stuff out there. Watch Ocean Kill Toys channel.
I just made a video about building your own practice, where to start. So, you could also watch that.
Check that shit out.
But when we say there's not much more we can say, it's about there's nothing more we can say, because praxis theology is inherently individual. It is how you perform religion, and thus it's going to be something that you have to grow for yourself. We can't give you it, although many people try to do so. You see a clergy program, that's people attempting to do a transferal of praxis theology, right? Essentially.
Yep.
This goes back to that talking of religion as institutions. It's a funky looking institution nowadays, but it doesn't change the fact that we've got all these different places that are influencing us. So now that we've kind of talked a good ways around and through both in almost equal parts the subjects of theology, it's worth mentioning some philosophy about like how we should conduct ourselves, some ethics, right? And I think for an inclusive organization or individual or kindred or whatever fucking words you want to use, your guideline is going to be pluralism. Pluralism being the idea that we can have a variety of perspectives and work together in synthesis. Think of your group of people, right? You've got the American system of like, oh, we're the melting pot, right? Where you put your Gruyere in there. Oh yeah, that's gonna mix nice with my fucking burrata, right? But a pluralist perspective would be like, hey, let's just make a salad. You know?
So true.
Let's make a salad, and everything will be better for having the other parts with it. But nothing has to sacrifice itself. The core idea here is that your theological convictions are not correct, right? We can recognize that there is things that we cannot know. And in that, it is reasonable for there to be a diversity of belief and a diversity of experience. Thus, we should be tolerant of this diversity of experience, and we should lean on it as a tool for all of us to grow. This does not mean tolerating harmful actions or harmful experiences, because they are actions of intolerance or of hate are inherently incompatible with tolerance. And so that's your paradox of tolerance shit. It don't apply here. But I think this is largely what is the best practice for having a co-religious group, or just being someone who is a part of a minority religion. If you're out there making more enemies than friends, you're going to have a really hard time, getting anything done.
Even if, by your own estimation, everyone around you is wrong as hell, sometimes just breathe, touch the grass, have a nice can of Dr. Pepper, and just chill.
Dr. Pepper, we coined that artificial taste. We're it.
And if your theological position is demanding, non-pluralism, it's probably an unreasonable theological position to begin with.
What's
100%?
Because it's relying on some kind of knowledge that you definitely don't have.
For example, there was an individual who we ran into a couple years ago, who held the belief that no gods other than the Norse gods existed, and that if you were a Norse heathen, that should be your standard for belief. If someone comes up to you and is a Kemetic, you should tell them they're wrong.
Their gods are not real, essentially, and that was such an amazing person. Just in general, they're fucking wild, but theologically speaking, since we don't want to get in the weeds of discussing this human's character, fucking hell. Like, we were even, questioning, because, Fishy and I are Anglo-Saxon heathens. Do we still count?
Yeah.
In this fucking weird schema?
So we can examine that using the lenses of those three theologies we just talked about, right? Mythically, this doesn't make sense, because we see the import of deities from other religions going into myths. And we're not mythic literalists, but we are saying that our ancestors believed in other traditions, deities existing, because otherwise why would they have written them in their myths, right? Mm-hmm. We can look at it from a natural theology lens. There's no justifiable reason why our deities would be the only deities that are possible. Any argument you could use to justify your own set of deities can be used to justify a different set of deities. And so this may be a point where someone is like, here's an issue with phenomenal conservatism. It may seem to me that there's only these deities, and so I believe it's true. No, hold on. The reason to disbelieve that is because of other people's experience. That's your negator, as we would say. And then if you're looking at it from praxis theology, well, how would you do that? Well, there's other folks who have other traditions, who perform ritual and have religious experience. And so from a praxis standpoint, that ritual, that action produces a experience or has the capability to do so, to have that interaction. So that is evidence through praxis theology that your theological unpluralist conviction is not correct or is not justifiable.
It doesn't function and does not allow you to be normal, you fucking weirdo.
Yeah. So there.
I think it's fair to say that a lot of bad theology that is like commonplace in paganism, like, only this pantheon exists, or mythic literalism, or things like that, are a lot of times badly imported from monotheistic theology, because that's what people are familiar with. They haven't really figured out that there's other ways of approaching theology yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is, and to allow the inner Catholic to come back out again, extremely Protestant.
It's
True.
worth pointing out here that pluralism, right, extends past just other religious things. It includes plenty other of categories, right? So part of a pluralist approach might be making sure that you're not violating religious consent. You're notifying people what would be expected of them during a ritual, or who it's going to be offered to. Giving people like a script of the ritual beforehand may be useful. It's not required, but giving people the ability to prepare in case there's a reason they might not participate in something, right? Being able to provide accessibility accommodations for folks who might have a disability, or for folks who may need something more to be able to actively participate in that setting. Yeah. That's
Yes.
I'm stepping off the soapbox now, only to step on it later when we continue the podcast.
So we just talked about co-religiosity and pluralism.
Yep.
And going back to, theology and how it is sometimes lacking in pagan spaces, partially due to paganism being, so relatively new, modern paganism that is, interrogation of beliefs. I don't want to say most pagans, but a lot of people who are religious in general don't interrogate their beliefs. And we were talking, I think yesterday, about someone who was saying that faith is what is important to the gods, like how much you believe in them. And if you don't believe in them enough, they're less likely to answer your prayers, which is bad theology.
That
is faith testing.
That doesn't track. Yeah, that doesn't track at all, historically speaking. And it doesn't track at all in modern day. There's plenty of people who are not very good at the faith thing. They're not very good at holding the most secure of deep belief in things, and yet they're still good at doing the religion. They're still good at.
There's plenty of pagans who going back to practice theology, yeah, they are polytheists, but that doesn't necessarily mean that their praxis is reliant upon faith, right? It might be useful to them regardless of how, quote-unquote, true it is.
Exactly. And, this shit ain't fucking D&D.
You're not
this
a
shit
cleric.
Ain't fucking D&D.
True.
You're not, It's worth pointing out that if your practice is, or your theology, rather, is one wherein the gods need people to survive, or the gods subsist off of our faith, that's a pretty hard thing to justify. And so you're going to be pretty hard-pressed to find old philosophical sources or any, logical justification of that, given how much we can't see. And so, I know this is a bit of a non sequitur, but it's something that I've seen a lot in pagans, is this idea that the gods need us as much as we need them. And I just think that's not to be anti-pluralist. I think it's a bit unlikely. I think it's
a misunderstanding of
reciprocity.
What is reciprocity and
Pax Deorum.
Pax Deorum, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I think it's taking that and drawing it to an extreme.
Yeah, it's taking that sort of because it's not wrong to say that man and God have a fairly tight relationship by and large. Obviously, they do the universe, and we throw them some food like they're a fucking duck sometimes. But to say that they require us, that our faith feeds them, that we created them. Like those things you're going to have to put, at best, you're going to have to put so much work into justifying, reasoning it out, and that just no.
The only reason I bring it up is because it is like essentially a big part of the argument of why people say the gods like faith. They need you to believe in them. It wouldn't make sense for the gods to act like that unless that were true, right? And we don't see the gods acting like that.
Not at all.
It doesn't seem to be true. It doesn't logically make sense. I'm not going to come at the concept of egregore. I'm not going there. I refuse to go there during this video.
Egregores.
But it's worth stating in no uncertain terms that, blind faith or belief in something that is not justifiable isn't a religious virtue. It's a cult tactic.
Correct.
Look at theism. Look at
And if you're saying that the gods
Protestantism.
value blind faith, yes, but I was about to say that. If you're saying the gods value blind faith, number one, that also seems to kind of be a holdover from Protestant theology that doesn't port into paganism at all. And it also requires throwing pretty much all other theology out the window. Because at that point you're saying, well, it doesn't matter what you think about them or how logically you approach them. What matters is that you believe in them regardless.
It doesn't matter that you act for them. It doesn't matter the cycle of reciprocity, because reciprocity, frankly, shouldn't be considered if what you're saying the gods value is blind faith, right? Because who cares if you throw a biscuit? Do you believe? Do
you believe? You have to believe that the god's going to take that biscuit.
Which...
Otherwise, it's not going to do it.
Exactly. No. So this is, I think, a good time to segue into what is one of the last things we want to really discuss today, is that the idea that you should be holding your beliefs, most of them, provisionally. There's certain core values that you may not want to budge on or may not seem reasonable to budge on, and that's fine. If you think murder is bad, I'm not going to tell you that murder isn't bad. I'm not going to tell you not to hold that murder is bad. Beliefs being held provisionally is the idea that, just because something seems really important to you now doesn't mean it's going to be important to you later, or that you might get new information which challenges this belief, or that you might be shown something that puts forth a new belief that is in conflict with that belief that you already hold. What I mean to say is that not being stagnant in your beliefs, not setting them in stone, because doing that will ultimately harm yourself.
You should hold your own beliefs up to scrutiny, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you're going to change. Our knowledge base as human people is going to change. You should be able to change with it. Believe it or not, that's the thing that makes people so successful. It's the reason we've gone from being ape in jungle to, oh no, I've upset the creationists. Well, not the creationists, the anti-evolutionists, because I think there are creationists that acknowledge evolution. It's what's gotten us from being ape in jungle to building the Burj Khalifa and sending rocket to moon and Mars and sending probe outside of solar system. Being able to adjust our beliefs is the thing that lets us thrive as people. It's the reason that you went to school. It's the reason that you watch the news. It's the
reason that you're listening to us right now.
Yeah. You should extend that to other beliefs, because sometimes the things that we don't hold provisionally are going to harm you.
And if you're worried about upsetting the ancient pagans, just know that they did the same thing.
Believe it or not.
Beliefs changed all the time.
If you think that pagans didn't change their beliefs, one, you need to read a history book. I beg you. And two, you are thinking that our ancestors were primitive, naive fools. And that is just, how dare you? Ancestor veneration is so important. How could you look at Jim Bob Joe of Oslo in the year 900 and think, this man didn't know Bilbo. This man doesn't believe. No. This man, Jim Bob Joe of Oslo in 679, or 976 or whatever I said. Jim Bob Joe was a reasonable man. He was a potato farmer, and he understood that when the soil seemed dry, he didn't keep believing that it was wet. He understood that when new people came into town and were like, I followed Jesus, he wasn't just like, oh, Jesus is fake. He was like, okay, I guess you followed Jesus. Cool. He probably wasn't like that. It was probably not as nice as that in history. But you know what I mean.
Things that currently exist in the medieval period, according to Glade: Bilbo Baggins and potatoes.
All I'm saying, besides Greek succubus, is that you should not, don't you dare put that disrespect on the name of Jim Bob Joe of Oslo 976. That man deserves more than you thinking that he was foolhardy and naive and primitive. That man had the wheel. That man had a loom.
True.
That man had a goat. Top that.
Fucked idiot.
Checkmate.
You didn't have
Checkmate
potatoes.
atheists.
Checkmate liberals. His wife didn't leave him.
I think this is a great time to end the podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for hanging on as we've been in this really extended break. Life hit the fan for us, and I'm sure it did for a lot of people. We appreciate you coming back and listening to us again, or if you're a new viewer here, consider subscribing or following. I don't know what it is on Spotify. Consider giving the video a like or a heart. Or the podcast, rather. We appreciate your support. We're more than happy just to have had you listen to us all the way through this, because frankly, that means that you at least thought something we said was good, or you were hate watching, and in which case, thank you for feeding our algorithm.
Thank you for feeding the algorithm and our souls, because we are the D&D gods, and we feed on hate.
Yeah, so before we get sucked back into the stomach of N'Zoth, why don't we just say goodbye, and we'll see you again sometime. Who fucking knows?
Who fucking knows? We might go on another hiatus. That's just fine. Look.
Go for 2 years.
This has been the Heathen Bitches podcast. Good night, Seattle.
Seattle?
Oh!
Yeah. And then we'll just have the music playing over us being like, why Seattle? Seattle's
Why the fuck Seattle?
Yeah, exactly.
Holy shit, what the...